the influences of big food and big pharma are dramatic. The food pyramid, which famously influenced our diets for decades, was developed by, or was funded by a group who, as Nina Teicholz and others have pointed out in published papers, have significant ties to big food industry.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Wellness at the Speed of Light podcast. I am so excited today to have Dr. Robert Lufkin on the program. Got to tell you, Dr. Lufkin, I have been following you now for well over a year. I love your social media stuff. You are so passionate about health and wellness and really trying to make a difference in people's lives. And like I said to you right before the show here, absolutely look up to you as a mentor in this space. You're doing so many great things. I always talk about personally myself, how heartbroken I am when I see all of these people coming in completely clueless on their own health and wellness and not understanding that they really need to be something that a good friend of mine, Margaret, always talks about. She's a big health and wellness person, is being CEOs of their own healthcare. And they're just not understanding these concepts. And so my practice has turned into, half of the time I just talk to them about how to make just simple lifestyle changes that can make dramatic differences in their lives. But you have a way of speaking to the lay public, which is such a breath of fresh air and so necessary for the metabolic crisis that we've got going on right now. So I thank you so much for what you are doing. And on that note, my first question is going to be really broad, and that is, how did you develop such just a deep passion and love on the topic of health and wellness, and how misinformed kind of everyone is out there?
Thanks, Stefano. Well, first of all, I want to say I'm a fan of your work in your new podcast too, and it's really an honor to be on it. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all the nice things you said. As far as my journey, I'd like to say that I got into health and wellness. I mean, I'm a medical school professor. I spent my whole career teaching, practicing, and doing research. So I'm basically the medical establishment. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I, left to my own devices, I would just go on and publish papers and practice medicine and not bother anybody. But I was sort of forced into examining my own beliefs, like so many people in this space, when I came down with chronic diseases myself, and I was informed that I would be on prescription medicines for the rest of my life for each one. And at that point, really out of self-interest, I began questioning things, and that's what started me on my journey.
And that is wonderful. At what point, let's get into the title of your new book, and then we'll kind of start right where you left off there. I just love this. I love this title. The first time you brought it out there, I said, bingo. That is something that it's really going to resonate, because it's so true. And we could talk about what we were all taught in medical school, but you title your book, and it's, some people are going to think of it as somewhat inflammatory, but lies I taught in medical school. And so, before we dive into the 10 lies, because I'm just going to read them out, and then we can kind of just start talking about some of these things. Can you tell me what you mean by a lie? Is it a lie where it's intentional, or is it because people just we don't know what we don't seek out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the title, it's a riff on many people use this sort of lies, different things. But my inspiration, there's one of the greatest doctors of all time, the end of the 19th century, Sir William Osler, has one of the greatest quotes about medical education, and that was he gave this quote to a graduating class of medical students on the day they were going to be doctors after they just completed their medical school. And he said, "Gentlemen," of course, at the time, most people were male. He goes, "Gentlemen, I have a confession to make. 50% of what we've just taught you is wrong or incorrect. And furthermore, we don't know which half it is. And I think it speaks to something, those of us who, we know, if you know science, you know medicine, it's the nature of the beast, sort of, that medicine and science is constantly evolving. What we thought was true at one point probably isn't true again. And we have to be open-minded to whatever the science shows us through evidence-based medicine, basically. So by lie, I don't think it's an intentional lie. I want to say, I think people in healthcare are, humans are basically good. Nobody gets up and wants to hurt anybody in the morning. But I do believe there are pernicious influences, both conscious and unconscious, that affect the way the decisions we make that are having very harmful effects on people.
Absolutely, well said. I have been frustrated not just by how much people seem to be misinformed in the general public, but how much our own colleagues seem to be misinformed. And really, some of the things you talk about in your book, where you really poke holes in them. I mean, it's hard not to read your book and be in tune with each of the 10, lies that you, again, I don't want to say lies that way either. I want to be very careful, because I think you're absolutely right. People in healthcare are very, very conscientious. They all feel like they're doing the right thing, but they might not, be doing the right thing. But after reading, the book, you make very poignant arguments on each and every one of these things. And the frustration that I have is, now that I'm a convert, let's just say, and I've completely, come over to, Dr. Lufkin's side, it's when I try to sit down in the I'm at the point where in the doctor's lounge, some of the when they see me coming, they just find another computer. They're just, you know what? I don't have to chart right now. Here goes Sinicropi. He's going to give us another lecture on mitochondrial health or some other thing that we're not interested in listening to. So I'm really passionate about it, and I just love your passion. But anyway, yeah, my frustration has been kind of people, even our own, not understanding these things. So I just want to read out the 10, lies, and then just start getting into your book, which, like, I'm going to say this over and over, every healthcare provider in America and beyond needs to get a copy of your book in their hands. You were very nice to me and allowed me to read this well in advance of the June release. And it really is an important work in American healthcare. So I think everyone needs to get it in their hands. But that being said, let's go through the 10. Here are the
Before
lies.
you do that, if I could just say one thing. I mean, we're both physicians. We're both in the healthcare system. And I think you probably agree. I mean, I certainly feel this way, that this book is not an indictment of everything in healthcare. In fact, I believe that, our Western healthcare system is equal to none for certain things, like infectious diseases, many we've been very successful at. If I get hit by a truck in front of my house and I need a blood transfusion and my bone's set, lifestyle and the dietary choices will help me heal better. But the acute management of these diseases, there's definitely a role for Western medicine, and it's unequaled. The problem is, and what we're going to talk about is these chronic diseases that now define literally our lifespan and our longevity. And these chronic diseases, when we try and apply the same techniques that we use for these acute conditions, with surgery and medicines, it was a wake-up call to me. Sadly, the medicines and the surgery really don't work on these things other than the symptoms. And there's a basic root cause that Western medicine is not getting to. So I just wanted to say that I'm not against all Western medicine.
No. You know what's funny? I always have to use those asterisks and let everyone know that, because a lot of times I'll go down these rabbit holes and I'll just go on a rant or something like that. And then I just say, don't get me wrong, Western medicine has saved millions of lives and will continue to do so. It's amazing. It's great. I've said this on so many, of the other episodes. You know what we're not good at, though? Doctors don't know what to do And again, it's not an indictment. It's just true. Somebody comes in and says, well, I don't feel good. And they say, well, you know what? Your blood pressure's okay and your labs seem to be okay. And then we'll get a little bit into labs later. And they say, well, you're fine. Go find a hobby. Go do something. I don't know what's wrong with you, but with no plan. Even though the patient might be, morbidly obese or have all these other things, we don't know how to treat these more, gray areas. And there's so many things outside of Western medicine. A lot of it is lifestyle, but I've gotten big into biohacks and all kinds of other things that we could talk about this for, 10-hour podcast if we had the time. But absolutely, I agree with you 100%. Western medicine is incredible. Me as a surgeon myself, right? If somebody fractures their spine, I'm not going to tell them, hey, you know what? Go watch Dr. Luff, show, because he's going to tell, man, if we get your sugar content down to, a gram a day, you're fine. That spine's going to put itself back together. Or if you have some acute crisis or, you need your gallbladder out or something like that, that's different problem. Now, whether you need your gallbladder out to begin with, if you had a different lifestyle, that's a whole different thing. But if you have an acute problem, yes, Western medicine is brilliant people. And again, everyone's trying to help, even in the chronic disease front. But what are we doing, to help? I know that you saw this even in your career. You're a radiologist. I'm a surgeon. We all have done different things. But in my career, people have sat down with me, and now that I'm dissecting what it is that's being done about their hypertension, about their cardiovascular disease, how their diabetes is handled, all I see is writing scripts, changing scripts, doing some other things. But then I ask patients, what are their lifestyle modifications? That's where we've got a big hole. What are their dietary changes? How are they avoiding toxins? All the things you talk about. So let's list the 10. And then obviously we don't have time to dissect all 10 unless, you want to spend the entire day with me. I'm happy to. That'd be wonderful. But let's go through the 10. The one little thing before that, what you said before, one of the quotes, I want to make sure I get this on the record. I love your quote about fixing the leak, right? You got to fix the leak. What are the root causes of the disease? Not just fixing, not just, kind of wiping the water away and just saying, oh, it's fixed. And then it's just going to keep dripping in the same spot. So the 10, metabolic health, obesity, diabetes, fatty liver, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, mental health, and longevity. And you're right. Those 10 have become our lives. Right. I mean, you get great quotes in there about how much, what percentage of the population is now suffering from 2 chronic diseases. It's mortifying. Just in the last 10 years, that it is a crazy slope. So I want to begin with, again, a lot of these are going to be broad questions. Metabolic health. How bad is the metabolic health crisis in our westernized society? Can you just, and I don't care how alarmist you want to be on this, because I'm very alarmist in it, because if we're not alarmist, people are not going to listen.
Yeah, I think metabolic health is foundational for all those diseases that you mentioned. That was the amazing thing. By switching to a metabolically advantageous diet and other things, people's blood pressure drops, their obesity goes away. They have lower risk for heart attack, cancer. People with Alzheimer's disease, their brain fog in some of them goes away. And, famously with Chris Palmer and Georgia Eads' work in mental health, some patients, not all patients, but some patients, when they switch their metabolism, they go off their psychiatric meds and go home to their family and get a job again. So metabolic health is really at the foundation. So how do you define metabolic health? If you use the metabolic syndrome by Professor Rev and at Stanford, there was a few years ago. There are a few criteria for it related to blood pressure, girth, and blood lipids. And there's a famous study done that showed in the early part of this century that showed that 88% of adults have at least one of those metabolic abnormalities as a marker for metabolic syndrome. So if you think about it, that's by far most people are metabolically unhealthy. But, as you mentioned, we're in an epidemic of all these chronic diseases are increasing like never before. Most people, most adults are either obese or overweight. Hypertension is almost at 50%. Pre-diabetes and diabetes is almost at 50%. So it can't be overestimated how important metabolic health is.
It's a great answer. It's just jump up. I mean, one of the phrases I use is, I just say, I'm going to just scream off the top of buildings on how bad it is. I mean, I sit there all day seeing these patients. I mean, on Wednesday, I saw 33 patients in my clinic, and I will tell you that fully 2/3 of them they're just sick metabolically. You look at the list of diseases that they have, you look at the medications they're on, they come in with I've said this before, and again, I'm not knocking the patients, but they come in with these bags of medicines, because I say, oh, what medicines are you on? They take out their bag, and they say, oh, I'm on all these, and I take my yellow pill at 8:30, and then I take my green pill. They don't even know what pills they're on and for what, and they're so ill. And these are not elderly people. I mean, these are kind of middle of life people that are so sick already, and it's very, very frustrating. And you're right, I love that study. I quote that study all the time, and I just tell people like, oh, I'm healthy, and I say, you might feel okay right now, but your lifestyle choices and everything, you're a ticking time bomb. It's just a matter of time before you go down that road. I think before we get into it, I know something that you're really passionate about. So we've got this big crisis. It's, borderline going to break our system if we don't take really serious action, all the things that you recommend. How have the influences, and now talking about how people don't understand this stuff, how have the influences of big pharma and big food played into the fact that we are almost ignoring the fact that we are becoming so sick over the last couple of decades? I mean, it's so obvious when you put it on paper and you quote the studies like you do and you show these graphs. But why are we so oblivious to it? Why do we think that it's okay to keep doing what we're doing?
Yeah, I think the influences of big food and big pharma are dramatic. The food pyramid, which famously influenced our diets for decades, was funded by a group who, as Nina Teicholz and others have pointed out in published papers, have significant ties to big food industry. So it's really paid for by big food, junk food makers. And if you look at the food pyramid, it's no surprise. The bottom line, which is what we're supposed to eat most of, is all junk food. It's grains, cereals, and high carbohydrate items. So it's affecting us there. Our scientific societies are being affected by influences. My mom was a dietitian. You go to a dietitian's meeting and it's sponsored by Coca-Cola, and fast food makers. The American Heart Association famously was funded by a seed oil company. Procter & Gamble, related to Crisco, early on funded them. And to this point today, the American Heart Association recommends vegetable oils, which I believe are pro-inflammatory and contribute to heart disease. They recommend it as a heart-healthy diet. And you can go on the American Diabetic Association. The diabetes group is funded. One of their big sponsors is DaVita Corporation. What does DaVita Corporation do? Well, they make renal transplant or dialysis machines and run centers for dialysis. What's the number one cause of renal failure? Type 2 diabetes. And that's reflected in the website. You see recommendations in the American Diabetic Association, the websites they have recipes there that are sugary recipes, and they say, oh, just cover it with insulin, which I believe is unhealthy advice and actually harms people.
Well, absolutely. And we'll talk about insulin resistance, in a little bit, and how I know how passionate about that topic you are. One of the things I love, and something that I also, just banging the drums, is this mentality of quick fixes, pills, surgeries. I got to tell you, this is something I talk about a lot. I cannot explain over the last year how many visits that I've had with patients where I'm arguing with them. I'm a spine surgeon. I'm not having I'm literally having arguments with them where they're demanding spine surgery, where I'm giving them 10 other tools to try. And they are so obsessed with this stuff. Or, it's no different than, when they go to their primary care doctors, they're demanding an antidepressant because they've been sad for a month, or they're demanding this and that, or it is so ingrained in the American psyche right now. I want to be a part of breaking that, and it is so powerful what the lobbyists have done on the minds, and also on the minds, of physicians. I know I've heard you talk, and again, we don't have time to go into the GLP-1s. That's a show, right? The GLP-1s, and I've talked about that, but it is unbelievable. Almost every other commercial that I hear now is about GLP-1s. I'm here in Minnesota. If you're a clinic and you're not prescribing GLP-1s, you're in the minority right now. I mean, we're giving this stuff out like candy. I thought I heard you say, I think I heard you quote, if everybody that is eligible for GLP-1s was on it, it's like trillions of dollars to the system. But if we just kind of reduce our sugar, it's trillions of dollars of savings. So the delta is insane, on that. So I don't know how else we can stress more that these quick fixes are wrong for chronic health and disease.
I'd rather take a pill than for longevity. I'll just give me rapamycin and I'll live forever. But it doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, the pills and the surgery, I mean, rapamycin's a whole other conversation, but the pills and surgery help things, but it's much more challenging and much more effective to change lifestyle. But it's a fundamental difference for the patient. If I'm a patient, I go in the office and you give me a pill or you give me surgery, I don't have to do anything. I show up for the surgery, I go to sleep, but it's not me. If you tell me I need to change my lifestyle, I need to change who I am, that's a different thing. But it's important because, to your point earlier, this is a new era of medicine where we are the CEOs of our lives. I mean, you and I both know how medical training is and how much we have to learn to be a doctor. But the first to admit that I know more about my own life and my own life experiences than any doctor I will talk to. I may not know all the physiology that a specialist might know and for a particular disease, but my own life experience, I have that. And the ability to change our lifestyle is about taking agency, and it's a new era in our lives where we control things and we control who we are. And that's going to facilitate a shift away from pills and surgery. Instead, lifestyle can make a difference and is much better and healthier than those.
Absolutely. That's a great thing. And I think that, one of the things that maybe we can get in on another show down the road, or, if I come on your show or something like that, is how AI and personalized medicine is really going to give people additional tools in being able to really understand, their own personal narrative, specific to them, and not one size fits all approach, and really hone it down, especially with the advent of these amazing wearables. And I see they're doing some work on continuous CRP monitoring, which is interesting. This, where I think it was at I don't know if one is somewhere in California. I'll get that to you. It's just interesting. Somebody texted that to me, and they said, "Hey, this is interesting. I think it's very experimental, but imagine knowing how much, that piece of food that you put in your mouth creates inflammation, down the road 6 hours later." It'd be interesting, to see, and that's all coming. So that's really, exciting. Let's talk about obesity for a little bit. So obesity is something that is so pervasive in our society. It is unbelievable. And all you have to do is look around. And again, this is not about saying anything bad about people or anything, but look at the toxic environments they're exposed to. Look at the food pyramid. Look at what they're eating. Half of my patients have some kind of sugary drinks under their chair when I walk in, and I always have to make a comment and try to explain to them how much sugar is in, the drinks that they're drinking and how it's contributing to everything. Can you just give us just a general overview of what has happened in obesity since the 1970s? What the major contributor, that in your opinion is to it, and what do we need to do to very gently nudge people to make, just dramatic differences in their lifestyles to change the trajectory of obesity?
Yeah, obesity, as you point out, has exploded in the last few decades. And about 10 years after that, diabetes, type 2 diabetes has exploded. And people are predicting in another 10 years, we're going to see the downstream diseases of diabetes also exploding. So it speaks to the fact that genetics are important, but they're not that important. If it were all genetically based, we wouldn't see these new things. So genetics for longevity or these diseases is probably a minor thing. And the big factors are something in the environment. So what's in the environment? What happened in the 70s and 80s. So it's an open question, but there are some very strong suspects. I mean, high fructose corn syrup was developed in the 1980s. Prior to that, the main cause of fatty liver was alcoholic fatty liver disease. After that happened, there was a new liver disease that was developed. It's now the number one cause of liver transplants and liver failure.
Yes.
It's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but there's very good evidence this is due to fructose, as it's a toxin like ethanol. It's detoxified by the liver and causes fatty changes. So fructose, high fructose corn syrup, glucose, junk foods in general. And with junk foods, we see seed oils also increasing, which are pro-inflammatory oils we mentioned earlier. A lot of people, because we can't do a controlled study, we don't know for sure, but those are the two that I think of a lot, but there are a lot of other people questioning other things as well, but junk food, no question, I think is the main driver for these.
No, absolutely. One of the things you quote in your book, which is very interesting, is in the 1900s, plural, people were consuming about 15 grams of fructose, and then it went to 55 grams currently, which is, it's so dramatic. And then you just had a great, beautiful graph that showed the explosion of sugar intake in 1980 and this high fructose stuff. And then you correlate that. How can that not be involved in the development of this, kind of the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? And then you talk about, and that has, we can talk about that now because it kind of correlates into the obesity thing before we get into my favorite diet, which is intermittent fasting. And I know that you're an intermittent faster because you talk about it. So I love it. Let's talk about like non-alcoholic fatty. One of the lies that you talk about is the fact that you can treat that with some kind of a medication or something, like that. Can you talk more about how your opinion is if you reverse your fructose intake or just general sugar intake, let's just be more general, how you may be able to reverse some of the damage that you are doing to your liver health?
It's amazing today that you still at leading medical schools and medical institutions, they'll have presentations on non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and they'll say, there's no treatment, you can lose weight maybe, or, exercise, but they don't really get specifically to the root cause. And Robert Lustig is a professor at UC San Francisco. He's done some beautiful work, prospective, controlled, blinded, randomized trials where he took children with fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They weren't drinking alcohol, they were kids, and they had fatty liver disease. And he took them and he changed their diet in the study. And he took the fructose that they were consuming and replaced it with glucose. So the point was it was an isocaloric exchange. So he didn't change the number of calories they ate. They ate the exact same number of calories. So it wasn't a weight loss effect. But just by switching out fructose for glucose, glucose is not, handled by the liver, doesn't have these issues that fructose has. By removing the fructose, he was able to reverse the fatty liver disease to a point that you could see the differences on the medical imaging, on the MR scans in a matter of weeks in this population. So the evidence is very strong that, fructose definitely plays a role, but it's not being widely accepted, and the message isn't getting out there.
I would just say, as far as messages getting out there, that's why I've made it such a mission of mine personally. I'm not doing these studies. Obviously, I'm a spine surgeon. That has been my lane for all these years. But I feel like I really can understand these things just kind of as others like yourself and so many others that came from different kind of perspectives. but to be able to communicate it in a very easy way for people to really understand what is going on. And a very similar thing to what you're saying is, for example, one of the things I'm really passionate about is photobiomodulation and utilizing red light therapy transcranially to treat things like concussion, Alzheimer's disease, and other things. There's tremendous early data at Harvard on these things, but yet there's no one that knows about these studies, like Dr. Lustig's studies and other things. We need to have these voices out here really communicating very clearly and succinctly to the public, and also reaching out to television and other people that say these are very important. Like that study, for example, is so critical. Why am I not seeing that? Why is that not on 2020? It's important. I mean, it can change millions of lives to understand that your fructose intake can change the way your liver functions, right? And can lead to metabolic disease. Why is this not really focused on? But I can tell you what is focused on: a lot of the new medications that are coming out for things which might have the most marginal effect. But yet, as you show so nicely, the way that we play around with numbers, some things you can show is just a little percent difference, whether you're taking it or not. But the difference between the two makes it seem statistically significant and like it's a big deal, but it's really not a big deal. But if you did something like just cut your sugar intake, it would be like night and day. I mean, these kids, like that study, you got me. I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that study. But if you're showing just in weeks that there's a change on liver scans, I mean, like every institution in the country should be doing these studies immediately to support it, to prove that, because that's going to affect millions of lives, not, like some rare genetic disease where, we spend billions and billions of dollars because now, don't get me wrong, some of the cures have been staggering, but again, we are always going down the route of what drug can we create to make billions of dollars, instead of, hey, don't eat sugar because it's going to kill you. I mean, it's just harder. It's just harder. One quick other point on that, just so that our audience gets it, because again, just getting out the message. I love you break it down really, really nicely where 30% of all sugars we take in eventually become fructose. And that's something that is not like readily out there. It's not taught anywhere. I didn't learn that we don't learn that, but that's really important, which means that no matter what, right, carbohydrate you're taking in, eventually some of it turns into fructose. So even if you say, hey, I'm limiting my high fructose intake because it's not on this label, you're still getting it. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Richard Johnson wrote a great book. He's a scientist at Colorado, a fructose expert, but he describes this pathway, the polyol pathway, where glucose can be transformed into fructose, and we're still just working out the details of it. And Dave Perlmutter has a book also about drop acid, about uric acid, but fructose drives uric acid and a lot of other things there. So this whole fructose thing is very new. It's where our understanding is changes. Fructose doesn't increase insulin directly. The American Diabetic Association used to recommend fructose for diabetics because it didn't spike their insulin. But of course, we now know that fructose drives insulin resistance, which is the sine qua non. It is type 2 diabetes. So it drives inflammation. There are a lot of other negative things, but the knowledge of fructose is evolving very rapidly, and it's mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing, and I just want others to be as excited as we are, about these topics, and it's really generating excitement about this that really gets people eye-opening. And so if we are presenting it like you do, like I said, I've watched so much of what you do kind of media-wise. I mean, you're getting people excited about this stuff. They want to learn. They want to kind of get your knowledge. But if we're just saying, there's the study out, it's interesting, we'll see what happens in 10 years, that's not a good way to get this information out. So again, I think this is the way to go. We just have to be passionate. We have to be advocates. We have to be evangelists for this stuff. I think you have to preach, and you are definitely a preacher on these subjects. On diabetes, before we get into intermittent fasting, which I really want to get into, what are we doing wrong on diabetes management? Again, another very broad question, but what are the 3 things that we can do as a medical community to make diabetes treatment more effective of curbing this explosion that has happened right behind obesity?
It's a great question. And let me be clear, when I'm going to talk about diabetes, I mean type 2 diabetes, which is the 90% of the cases, it's the explosion. Type 2 diabetes is interesting because it's due to carbohydrate toxicity. So I don't believe insulin is a treatment for type 2 diabetes. I think you're controlling hyperglycemia and keeping people from dying of that, but you're not. And there are studies that we talk about in the book that show that long-term insulin, tight control with insulin doesn't affect the complications of diabetes significantly, the heart disease, the Alzheimer's, the cancer that comes on. So what I can't understand is that type 2 diabetes is carbohydrate toxicity, right? So carbohydrates are one of the 3 macronutrients that are non-essential. There are human populations that don't eat any carbohydrates, famously carnivore diets.
Yes.
And these people don't have type 2 diabetes for the most part. And most people, when they go on, most if not all, when they go on a severe carbohydrate restriction or a carnivore diet, their diabetes will dramatically reverse. And, in many people, they'll go off all medications and return to normal. So I can't figure out why. Again, maybe it's the pill thing. It's easier to inject insulin and get my fingers and my toes chopped off and go down that path than it is to change my lifestyle. But I think we're missing something really important here.
Absolutely. One of the authors that part of your, the preface, the forward there in your book, Dr. Jason Fung, as we talked about before the show, his book, The Obesity Code, where he really goes into, he's a renal specialist, but the Obesity Code is all about intermittent fasting and how it changes everything, how it changes the entire metabolic cascade. But the big takeaway from that, when I first read it, I get goosebumps talking about his book from when I first read it, because it changed everything for me and the way I thought about things. Just the statements that he was making about the percentage of type 2 diabetics that were completely reversing their diabetes. Now, it was all about, all the renal issues that he was seeing that really spurred him onto that. But just in seeing the complete 100%, reversal in some patients, but in a high percentage of patients, their insulin requirements went down right away and then they were off of it. My frustration with that whole thing is, how is that not the number one thing that is preached to type 2 diabetics? In fact, not only is it not preached, but I will tell you that some of the patients that I have at least counseled, and I always ask them, talk to your primary and make sure it's okay with them, because I might not be familiar with, your 17 medications. Just make sure it's okay, from their perspective to be on an intermittent fasting diet. Sometimes, honestly, we've even gotten pushback where people are told they shouldn't intermittent fast because it's not healthy for them. It's catabolic. They're going to lose muscle and all these other things. How frustrated are you that information like this is not readily known? I talk to people all the time. I ask people, what percentage of people will reverse their type 2 diabetes on an intermittent fasting diet? And even better, right, if you do intermittent fasting and the carnivore diet, kind of simultaneously, even faster results. But how much frustration is this for you? And I know you see the pushback. Can you talk about just how is this particular message not literally front and center? I don't see billboards on that. How many pharma billboards do we see? I don't really see the intermittent fasting billboards up there. Maybe we should start paying for this stuff, honestly, and just start.
The intermittent fasting is so powerful that it produces this metabolically healthy state, this ketogenic state. And, you can get to it with carnivore, but if you're a vegan, you can make choices that will also get you in this state. So it's not like if you don't eat meat, you can't do it. No, you can do it as a vegan also. But it's amazing that this message isn't getting out more. I can't understand why this is. It's just, it makes no sense at all. And the great thing about it, this improved metabolic state, it not only helps type 2 diabetes, but it also helps with obesity. It also helps with all of the other diseases we mentioned. One contributor to it is media. There was recently an article that came out saying that fasting intermittent fasting contributes to cardiac disease. It was quoted widely in the media, and I have a lot of people who said, well, I'm not going to fast anymore. I don't want to get a heart attack. And I think that was disingenuous. It was inappropriate, and it harms a lot of people because what they were quoting was not a peer-reviewed study. It was an abstract from a scientific meeting, which had not been published. And people weren't able to look at it and analyze it and critique it. Instead, it was just released to the media. So all kinds of issues going on that we face here. But intermittent fasting is huge. I think it's extremely healthy, and, check with your doctor if you're on a lot of meds, but otherwise it's the one thing you can do without even changing what you eat. If you just change when you eat, you'll actually be more metabolically healthy, in my opinion.
One of the other, added benefits with intermittent fasting that I see in a lot of my patients that are having a lot of chronic pain is just from intermittent fasting and in reducing sugar, there is a significant benefit into the perception of pain, right? Because it's such an anti-inflammatory way to live that without question, it desensitizes, your small, without getting into, to the weeds, plain and simple. If you go on intermittent fasting, or you choose to do, more of a kind of a paleo, carnivore kind of diet, something like that. I mean, there's different varieties of these things for people that don't want to do the 16-8 or the 20, whatever they choose to do on intermittent fasting. It's dramatic as far as pain management and helping, to stem some of this chronic pain crisis that we have. Again, we don't talk enough about some of the pain crisis being related to the intake of massive amounts of sugar. I mean, it's all related. These are known things. And I want to keep repeating, some of the people that, have been following me, they're like, you're repeating. But now I can quote Lufkin and say, well, Lufkin, he just keeps repeating because it's like, saying somebody's name 3 times so you remember it. We've got to keep saying, this is for this does that. Now that we're talking about intermittent fasting, you had mentioned it earlier. I think it's a good time to just do a little bit on it. The unbelievable data that's coming out in intermittent fasting or just low sugar diets and the change in mental health. It's unbelievable what's going on there. One of the things that, I really, really have been focusing on, even on my patients, a lot of mental health issues, but looking at it from a dietary standpoint, but also from a microbiome health standpoint, which is, again, an entire other show because the stuff that's coming out on microbiome is amazing. So as far as if there was one study that our audience could go to on kind of brain diseases, brain health, and dieting, and changing your diet to either carnivore or intermittent fasting, what would be the one, if we could just get folks to just look at one thing or look at one particular author on this subject?
I mean, a great introduction is a book called Brain Energy by Chris Palmer. He's a psychiatrist from Harvard hospitals. He talks about using the fasting and the effects of fasting, which is ketosis, which he can simulate with a ketogenic diet. But he has had dramatic results reversing mental illness in some, not all patients, but some patients, to the point where they're discharged from the hospital, they go back to their families, go back to their job. Georgia Ede also has a book out on the subject that's very good. And Stanford, independently of them, just published a controlled study about using ketogenic diets for mental health. But the point is, when we fast, our body naturally goes into this ketogenic state. So intermittent fasting is one way to develop this metabolically healthy state.
What is you're a 1 meal a day guy? Are you like a 20 off and 4 on, or is it just like 1 meal and that's it for you?
Usually, yeah, 1 meal when my kids come home from school. I have safe dinner, eat with them, but breakfast and lunch, I not only save time, but I save money too. But it's not about that. It's about I feel better. My mind is clearer. I have more energy than when I was eating, carbs all day long and snacking, like my mom, the dietitian, told me to do every day. Yeah. Instead, I fast and I've never felt better. I work out fasted, I exercise fasted, and it's a great state to be in for me.
I love that there's all kinds of different versions. I mean, I usually fast for 16 to 18 hours a day. I always try to work out fasted. I other than, if I'd been up all night with some patient issue or something like that, other than that, I try to, maintain that on a regular basis. And you're absolutely right. I've never felt better than being on a diet. And I preach this. So it's nice when the physicians themselves that are recommending these things really are also doing it themselves. And, one of the things that a mom, of a very unfortunate person that committed suicide who had reached out to me, said is that first we need to practice the Hippocratic Oath on ourselves as physicians before we even think about other people. Because if we're not doing it ourselves and we're out here banging the drum on low sugar intake and intermittent fasting, it just doesn't quite make sense. And we're not also going to have the passion behind it if we're not seeing the result in our own lives. And so that's something that's near, and dear to me is really getting physicians to be more healthy so that they can then pass on their healthy lifestyles, because there is a problem amongst our physician ranks with all kinds of stuff, mental health issues, burnout, poor diets, poor lifestyle. That does not translate well into then being excited into then passing that on to their patients, because we have our own problems. So I think, you have to you have to have your own house in order before you can really do the work that we are called to do and help other people. I'm not saying they can't if they're not doing it, but it sure helps, right? To feel good and to be energetic and to just want to preach and be out there talking about these things. One more thing that I just, as to be cognizant of time, one of the things, cardiovascular disease and the damage that all this stuff does. Can you talk about this concept of the endothelial glycocalyx? Because it's something that I've become pretty passionate about. It's so fascinating, something that we really don't talk about much because we talk about other mechanisms of it, but not really focusing on the endothelial glycocalyx. Can you tell us why it's so significant in heart disease and why you talk so much about our fascination with LDL and that's not the answer?
Yeah, no, the endothelial glycocalyx is such an important structure. It's sort of it's the Teflon smooth lining of our blood vessels, and it's affected by things like nitric oxide, which which is also affected by urate and fructose. And it's at the root cause, if you think about it, this endothelium, all the blood vessels of our body, of the arteries, contribute to, obviously hypertension, obviously cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attack, but also Alzheimer's disease. And, we can see a pathway where this inflammation, endothelial glycocalyx, is so critical. So it's really important. And a lot of physicians aren't that aware of it. Yes. It doesn't get a lot of attention.
Thanks for that. Actually, and I don't know if you're familiar with this device, but we are now using something called the GlycoChe device. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you put the thing under your tongue and it gives you kind of a general health score, your microvascular score, based on the way that that the blood cells are moving and the capillaries. It's all about the function of the endothelial glycocalyx. Is that something that you guys
I'm familiar with it, but it sounds like a great product. I've looked at it before, so I'm curious if you like it, then that's good enough for me. We'll definitely check it out.
No, absolutely. We're using it in our wellness centers now to get a baseline, and we're finding some interesting stuff. I mean, people are a lot sicker than they think they are, even though they come in, they're like, I'm great. And then we do their testing and it's not great. And then we're combining that. We're just going to start doing this brain mapping, these EEGs, to look, like you say, I know you're really big into how can we start predicting who is really at risk and taking measures now. But by doing that, so we're looking at like microvascular health and then what their current brain health is, especially kind of frontal lobe function, and then adding bone health. We're going to be doing this REMS, bone device to look at their bone scores and bone quality, a little different than DEXA scans. And really, because by doing diagnostics, you can tell people, hey, you're really at risk here and it's really problematic. And hey, we can treat you with these things. So on that note, I think we've covered a lot of great topics. I would love to have gone into every single one of these because, again, offline, we could talk about this for hours, but we have to give it to folks in small bites because they really have to think about. But I think a lot of the nuggets that they're going to get out of this is just amazing. I mean, it's just the basics that they need to know to understand. So I would say, again, what would be your final pitch if I'm a patient sitting in front of you and I'm leading a poor lifestyle. I've got my can of pop in front of me, and let's just say it's a good, 72 ouncer, right? Because I really got to get my morning drink, and it's morning, right? What is the pitch to people that are listening to this program? What do we need to do? What's the basics? How do I start, doctor? What do I need to do here?
Well, what I love about lifestyle, and we touched on it a little bit before, is that it's something that we as patients are in control of. We get to choose every single day. Every morning when I wake up, I get to choose, am I going to have that big gulp of sugar or something else, and begin our journey each morning with a new, fresh start. And that's the challenge for everybody. Start with small steps, but start, and they build and build and build. So lifestyle is so powerful, and it's so empowering that I think more and more people need to know about it and embrace it, because it's going to change the future of healthcare.
Again, it's all about being the CEO of your healthcare. One of the other little things I just want to get out before, because we didn't get, I just love quoting you. Sugar is the new tobacco. I think that is a great takeaway from a lot of the things that you talk about, and we want, our audience to know that. And I would say that the final thing, as far as pitch, how do we get our colleagues to really step out of their silos and start thinking about the totality of the patient and the critical nature of lifestyle modifications? No matter if you're touching patients' lives, we really need to be preaching lifestyle modifications. What's your pitch to our colleagues?
Well, for some of them, they may be forced, like you and I and others, by personal changes, and we're, forced to look for ourselves out of self-interest. But hopefully, as more people are aware of this message, they see what's possible with lifestyle, they'll have an awakening and begin to, embrace it in their practice. But the silos are really a challenge.
I think it's one of the biggest challenges we face. And, I look forward to collaborating with you and, the thousands of other people out there that are really trying. Not all of them are physicians, but there are so many people that are banging their heads on their wall, just wanting to scream about how obvious the changes that we can make are and how much of a dramatic difference it's going to make into, saving our healthcare system. So, on that note, time has come to an end here. I just want to say thank you for everything that you are doing. Everybody should go out there and follow you on social. Your book is an absolute must. It's an absolute must. I'll be pounding the table on that. Where can people find you best before we go here? If they want to learn all about Dr. Lufkin, just tell us what, website, social media, where
Sure.
should we look for you?
My website is Robert Lufkin, Lufkin, MD.com. And you can download a free sample chapter of the book if you want to check it out and see if you like the style. And then I'm active on social media, and the links are there as well.
All right. Well, fantastic. So thank you so much for coming on the show today. And thank you everyone for listening to this really important episode on Wellness at the Speed of Light with Dr. Robert Lufkin. And I really hope that after you listen to this episode, you get the book, but that you spread it to everybody that you know, because it is going to take an army of all of you to get out there to make the changes that we need to stem our health crisis. We'll see you guys next time on the next episode.
Thanks, Stefano.